Hi everybody, this is Mrs. Wilson, and today we're going to be looking at another effect of the French and Indian War, and that is the Boston Massacre. We all know that as a result of the French and Indian War, Great Britain, as you learned yesterday in your reading from the online textbook, was suffering from tremendous debt. They owed a lot of money following that war. That was a long, lengthy war. It lasted 9 years in North America. That's twice as long as World War II lasted, and World War I for that matter. A very, very long war. 9 years in the colonies, and in other parts of the world it lasted 7 years. Wars cost a lot of money, and as a result, Great Britain was in a tremendous amount of debt with no way to pay it back. And so they began passing taxes on the colonies, which was, sort of different in that for 150 years they had really neglected the colonies. They didn't enforce any of their previous tax laws because the colonies were becoming quite wealthy, and as a result, Great Britain was becoming quite wealthy. And even though the colonies were trading with other countries against what British laws said that they could do, Great Britain ignored that, and really intentionally ignored that, because both Great Britain and the colonies were benefiting from that neglect. They were both profiting, making a lot of money. But now the end of the war leaves Great Britain in debt, and they have decided after 150 years of very loosely enforcing tax laws and trade laws that now they want to be very strict about enforcing those tax and trade laws to pay back the debt. And so that brings us to an event known in U.S. history as the Boston Massacre. So let's look ahead. History or propaganda is the question that we're going to kind of be thinking about as we go through this. And propaganda, I wrote the definition of it in white below here. And propaganda is the spreading of ideas or beliefs to gain support for a cause. So keep that in mind as we go through the following slides. So the question isn't if something happened on March 5th, 1770 in Boston, Massachusetts, but rather what exactly happened. The previous picture is that of an engraving by Paul Revere, and his depiction of events on March 5th, 1770 after 9 p.m. that evening. And this is a depiction of the Boston Massacre from the British perspective. And you can see, going back and forth to these pictures, that their perspectives are different. And so, really and truly, if you think about it, if people watch an event, let's say there's a car accident, and 3 or 4 people see the same car accident, there's a really good chance that they aren't going to report the events of that car accident exactly the same. And this event, certainly with the Boston Massacre, is no different. There's a lot of activity going on, a lot of excitement, a lot of yelling and throwing of things, and people that are kind of on edge with one another, the British and the colonists not getting along. And so there's a lot of hostility in the air, a lot of excitement, a lot of tension. And things happen so quickly that it's really kind of hard to get an accurate assessment of events that occurred. So the historical background, I kind of alluded to it already. Great Britain is in debt. They begin passing taxes. And really the key here is enforcing taxes and enforcing trade laws that were otherwise neglected for about 150 years. And the taxes become so burdensome to the colonists that they begin to revolt, they begin to boycott, and refused to buy British products or do business with stores that sell British products. They even go so far as to tar and feather tax collectors, as we see here in this picture. This is a tax collector who has been, whose body has been doused or in tar. And on top of the tar, he has feathers have been thrown on him so that they stick to the tar. And mind you, this is hot tar. This is scalding tar. This is, the kind of injury that would produce second and third, probably third degree burns on your body. And then, if you can see here in the center, this colonist is pouring tea down the tax collector's throat. And you can see tea written on there, because tea is one of the items that is taxed. And so if you were a tax collector in the colonies, you were a pretty hated individual. You were not well liked. And so they certainly became the target of a lot of resistance and abuse by colonists that were fighting back against tax collectors and collection of taxes by the British government. And of course, you see here too a noose. It wasn't enough that they tarred and feathered tax collectors, but they would hang the tax collector as well. So let's look at what happened. Was some of the taxes that were passed. First of all, in 1765, the Stamp Act is passed following the French and Indian War. This is a tax on all paper products, and that includes things like newspapers and decks of cards. Many people played cards back in that day because, quite frankly, they didn't have video games. So playing cards, especially if you're a sailor sitting on a ship in the Boston Harbor and you're waiting for products to be loaded onto a ship and you've got a lot of free time, you're going to play a lot of cards. And so sailors on ships in the Boston Harbor, where a lot of this really is taking place, are going to be pretty hard hit. And so they really, really resent taxes on all paper products, but certainly on decks of playing cards. An organization formed at the same time in response to the Stamp Act, and that was the Sons of Liberty, created by Sam Adams, and this is a way to unite colonists and colonies. Yes, most of these events occur in Boston, but the feeling slowly but surely is trickling outside of Boston that the British Parliament is becoming incredibly oppressive and strict against the colonies. Non-importation agreements are also passed in 1765, and this is a boycott against the importation of goods into Boston Harbor. 60 merchants, 60 store owners agree, and 60 do not. They signed this agreement August 1st, 1768, and essentially they refuse to import or allow goods from Great Britain to enter into Boston Harbor. If all of these goods are going to be so heavily taxed, then the good people of Boston don't want those goods in their harbor, so they won't allow those British ships with manufactured products to even unload all their products. So they begin to fight back, and this is probably one of the most effective ways that they will protest Great Britain's taxes, is by simply not allowing those goods to be taken off the ships and sold in British shops to begin with. And as a result of many of these earlier boycotts, Parliament will revoke the Stamp Act, and actually Benjamin Franklin will go directly to the British Parliament in London and speak with them face to face and convince them why the Stamp Act should be removed and how punishing it is against the colonies. British troops eventually arrive on October 1st, 1768. A group of British regulars arrived in Boston, Massachusetts to enforce new British mercantile laws and maintain order. The civilians reacted to the redcoats like they were invaders by taunting them through name-calling, spitting, and fighting. During the next 18 months, tension mounted between the two sides, the colonists and the British troops. So what caused the tension? Resentment of these troops symbolized the loss of their freedom and growing British control. Remember, the colonists for 150 years had become rugged individualists living on their own, passing their own tax laws, governing themselves, all without the assistance of the British Parliament, and fighting the Native Americans and the French and the Spanish all on their own without any help from Great Britain. And so they feel really invaded by the British that all of a sudden want to take a more active control in the lives of the British colonies. The troops didn't make much money at this time and often needed side jobs to maintain a living. They often took jobs that colonists might have had or simply worked alongside other colonists. So now you have British and colonists working in close quarters together, and neither one of them necessarily liked one another. Unable to secure lodgings or shelter in town, British troops pitched tents on the common, and this is a picture here of the common. It would be like if somebody started pitching a lot of tents in Central Park, for example, in College Station, because they had nowhere else to live. The stench from the latrines, were their bathrooms, wafted through the city on every breeze. So you can imagine how nasty that was to smell the waste of the British the British troops that were living in the Boston Common in the tents. The conflict begins when crowds in the town square were quite common, and the crowds often harassed British soldiers. On a snowy evening, March 5th at 9 p.m., the situation got ugly. The crowd soon swelled to almost 400 men. They began pelting the soldiers with snowballs and chunks of ice led by Crispus Attucks. They surged to within inches of the fixed bayonets and dared the soldiers to fire. The soldiers loaded their guns, but the crowd, far from drawing back, came close, striking at the soldiers with clubs and a cutlass. The soldiers fired, killing 3 men outright and mortally wounding 2 others. The mob fled. As the gun smoke cleared, Crispus Attucks on the left and 4 others lay dead or dying. 6 more men were wounded but survived. So this is Crispus Attucks right here. The very next day after the massacre, an engraving of the event by Paul Revere appeared in the Boston Gazette. This is the picture of that engraving. What actually happened that evening in early March of 1770 may never be known for certain, yet the Boston Massacre certainly helped reinforce the idea that the British were oppressive, whether it was true or not. So here is your assignment in the Google Docs that follows this recording. Compare the images of the Boston Massacre. Complete the chart in number 1 on your handout using these 2 images. You have the American version, Paul Revere's version of the Boston Massacre here on the left, and in image 2 you have the British version of the Boston Massacre. And you also have, for closer inspection, you have larger pictures of these documents in this slideshow. So going back to the Google Docs that follows this recording, compare these 2 images, and there will be a question at the bottom of the comparison of these 2 images that you will answer as well. Don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions at all. I'll be available all day through Schoology Messenger. And I have Zoom hours at 12:30. 2 p.m. on Thursday afternoon.